It sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Dealie.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable.
This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Don't you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
Dietitian, and she was just like, you know, it's not complicated. You can sum up healthy food in 7 words, which is eat food, not too much, mostly vegetables.
I've heard that too.
Yeah, and it's just like, okay, that makes sense. I can do that. But
I heard you even say mostly green stuff is what I've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like, and there's now like new classifications, and she says this is like as important as, you know, the sort of classification of vitamins, which is raw foods, first processed, and then ultra processed, which is like raw foods are like, you know, plants, vegetables, you know, shit that grows out of the ground, fruits, or you know, comes from an animal, right? And then there's secondary processed food, which is like things that you cook with, table salt, you know, garlic salt, butter, spices, that type of thing. And then there's the one that's ultra processed, and that definition is the raw foods plus the processed ingredients, typically plus like lab chemicals. Right. And chemicals is like a mean word, but I'm just saying items that are used for preserving and flavor and texture that you wouldn't get at the grocery store, combined, pre-cooked for you, and then sold to you. The best example would be like raw food is an ear of corn, processed food is a can of corn, and then ultra processed is a Dorito.
Right.
Right. And she's just like, the first two are generally almost always perfectly fine, no matter what it is. The third one is the one that you got to watch out for. And I think that's very intuitive.
Yeah.
It's just very easy to make it very complicated because lots of people are trying to lose weight. Lots of people are trying to get healthy. So it's very easy to, you know, make it, mystify it, and then have some guy on TikTok demystify it by giving you very simple, fairly stupid rules.
True.
You know,
that being said, pay no attention to the massive tub of peanut butter filled pretzels behind me.
Doritos this morning.
That was from a Costco run the other day.
Yeah.
I was like, ooh,
this is why we shoot from the neck up here, because I can know what's right for me. It doesn't mean that I'm doing that.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Biographers. I'm Daniel Newman, and with me is Akiva Miola.
Hello.
We're going to get going into Leonardo da Vinci Part 5 before we do a couple things to mention. First and foremost, if everybody out there, or really anybody out there, is enjoying our show so far, I would humbly ask that you support us on Patreon. That's just going to be patreon.com/thebiographers, just like it sounds. As of now, Akiva and I were just having a long conversation about this before we started to record here. This is all completely self-funded. We do this for free as of now. So we would like to change that and make this into a full-time career, potentially. And obviously, every dollar, every penny, every quarter is going to help. So anybody out there is able to support us, we would really appreciate that.
You certainly pay for things that make you dumber. Now pay for something that makes you smarter.
Hey, I like it. And right along with that, it's looking like in about mid-August, we are going to be launching a Kickstarter, so a crowdfunding campaign. And really that is just to continue the endeavor here, probably pay for things like marketing expenses, trying to get the word out more and build this into something a little bit more sustainable. So keep an eye out for that. That's going to be, and really what we would appreciate is for anybody out there to sign up for it. Right now, we need to have, it's a pretty small amount, but if we just get 10 people to sign up for it as a, even just interested, like following the account, you don't even have to pay us any money or pledge any money, but just kind of sign up for the page for when it does launch. As soon as we get 10 people, it becomes a public campaign and it can go potentially onto the Kickstarter website for just anybody to discover and find us rather than going here specifically. So anybody out there, if you are interested in supporting us there, that's kickstarter.com/profile/thebiographers. Again, kickstarter.com/profile/thebiographers. So keep an eye out for that. That's going to be, I'm thinking probably mid-August. Seems like probably the appropriate time once we give people some sort of runway to potentially look for it.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the announcements that I got here.
Okay, so to get into Da Vinci, in our last episode of Leonardo da Vinci, we covered a good sampling of everything that makes him who he is. We started off talking about his first steps into the medical field with dissection and his mind as an engineer making mechanisms for clocks, guns, and even water wheels. He also makes dozens of accurate scientific discoveries, such as figuring out inertia, friction, and the Bernoulli effect, all which would help him make his first attempt to fly using Il Gran Nibbio, which would only glide for a few meters before crashing dramatically.
And then having his buddy break his leg or legs?
One leg.
One leg, okay.
Yeah, which is like, you know what, honestly, great that he recovered, because in Renaissance Italy, breaking a leg is not exactly like a, let's just sign your cast and you're okay sort of situation.
A little bit more complicated.
Yeah. So in the art world, Da Vinci created The Last Supper, which would stand the test of time despite history's best efforts to destroy it. We also concluded the story of the Sforza Horse Monument, when French invaders would shoot his clay model with arrows, completely destroying it, only for a similar sculpture to be made 500 years later by an airline pilot from Pennsylvania. Da Vinci would spend a few months in Milan under French rule, but would hightail it out of there when he found out his old boss was planning to lay siege on the city. So with all of his life's work in 2 covered wagons, Da Vinci heads back to his hometown, Florence. It's been 17 years since Leonardo had lived in Florence, and it had changed drastically, along with the world at large, so let's cover what happened while he was gone. If you remember, Lorenzo de' Medici was the sole survivor of the Pazzi conspiracy, an attack that would have the opposite effect that the Pazzi intended, making Lorenzo the city's golden boy, cementing him as a man of the people and patron of the arts. The Medicis had Florence in the palm of their hand at this point, and many noblemen believed their next step would be to rule over the city as the Sforzas did in Milan. But Lorenzo never did. Instead, he would continue on the republic his family built, albeit a little bit puppet stringy, which the people of Florence supported. They thought they were going to get a duke after this, but instead he kind of keeps the republic going, right?
Okay.
His love for the arts would expand, and he would even begin an artist group called the Platonic Society, along with a sculpture school held in his garden.
I'm sorry, that sounds like a bunch of guys who are secretly gay being like, hey, no. We're just friends here. Thing. We're all just pals. Don't get any ideas.
Yeah, I imagine like the officers of the night would like come knocking on the door and like everybody's like making out and they open the door and they're like, what's going on in here? We're like, oh, we're starting the Platonic Society. It's just for guys being bros.
No. This is called the Platonic Society. We're all just friends. We're all just painting.
we're just a couple guys who like to, I don't know, paint nude men.
We appreciate the human form.
So, like I said, he also started a sculpture school in his garden. Lorenzo would patron dozens of painters and sculptors, including one of his favorites, Domenico Ghirlandaio. Lorenzo asked Domenico for his best apprentice, and he mentioned he had a child who was so talented in sculpting, he was convinced to pay him a salary at only 14 years old. The child, of course, was Michelangelo.
Ooh.
Yeah. Lorenzo was a banker, first and foremost, and he knew this kid would become one of his greatest investments, so he would take him in as his own son, even offering Michelangelo's father a position in his court. Leonardo did not meet our favorite pizza-slinging sculptor yet, but there's still time.
Well done. I like pizza slinging sculptor.
I thought I was going to trip on that one. Unfortunately, Lorenzo's fate would take a turn for the worse in his 40s, and he would begin to develop strange changes to his body. His face began to change, getting more prominent, with his forehead being thicker along with thicker hands and pain in his bones.
Puberty hit late.
It's funny that you say that. So while people at the time attributed it to gout, it would turn out Lorenzo the Great suffered from acromegaly, the same disease that the wrestling legend Andre the Giant had.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah. So when you have it as a kid, it's gigantism, right? But if you have it after puberty, it's called acromegaly, and it's a little bit harder on the body.
Anybody want a peanut?
While Lorenzo didn't reach gigantic proportions, with his symptoms only starting when he was an adult, it would still cause him enough pain to step away from the public eye. Once again, Lorenzo's apparent weakness would have the wolves circling, this time in the form of a preacher named Girolamo Savonarola. So, to add another Game of Thrones reference, this would be the scene where the High Sparrow takes over King's Landing.
Oh, okay. Great reference.
Yeah. So
now I've got a way better picture now.
Yeah. While Florence spent decades priding itself in its progressive attitude, Girolamo would whip up Florence into a religious frenzy, condemning the Medici for allowing Florence to turn into a cesspool of sin. Yeah, so after Lorenzo's death, Girolamo would become the de facto ruler of Florence, sort of setting up a democracy, but it's only a democracy if you're a priest and then you can vote. So basically, not really helpful.
Interesting. So it's like a similar situation to where like the lords of England that were the landowners, they could vote, but not any of the peasants under them, except instead of the lords that were landowners, they were religious figures, basically, like priests.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was kind of going against the church a little bit with this. The church did not ask him to do this. He was just like very fervently anti-Medici and just like was super religious. So he's like, I'm going to take over the city and fix it. So like I said, after Lorenzo died, Girolamo took over, but he would kind of take things a step too far in 1496, where he would commence a night he called the Burning of Vanities on Carnival, forcing Florentines to burn their playing cards, personal ornaments, pictures he considered lewd, and even some precious art. He would later be rejected and executed along with his followers in 1498.
For basically doing this?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
The people are just so fickle at this time. They're like, oh, we love Lorenzo. He's the best. And then some guy's like, I kind of don't like Lorenzo. And they're like, you're right. And he's like, also, I don't like naked women. He's like, you're wrong. Let's kill you. Just like,
don't take the naked women from the Italians. I know that.
Yeah. So I was about to say, like, this has only happened in like 4 or 5 years. It kind of made the city a little bit bankrupt, too. So kind of getting back to where Leonardo steps in, I can imagine Leonardo felt about Florence the way lots of people do when they come back to their old hometown. While it all looks mostly the same, shops he frequented had closed down and the economy had taken a huge hit with all of the political unrest. It would seem to Da Vinci that Florence had lost the shine it had when he was an excited 20-something working for Verrocchio. In a way, Leonardo had come full circle, arriving back home at the same age as his old master was when they met, this time with his own full studio in tow. When Da Vinci first arrived, he and his crew lived in the church of Santissima Annunziata, which was no Castle Vecchia, but had accommodations that probably excited Leonardo even more than the Duke's castle. He and his retinue were given 5 rooms and full access to a library with over 5,000 volumes. And it was only 3 blocks away from the Santa Maria Hospital, where Leonardo would soon resume his dissections and his studies of human physiology. If you remember, he took a break for a couple of years.
Very cool.
Da Vinci was determined to move forward with new paintings for the church and his Florentine patrons. Unfortunately, there was one thorn in his side that he picked up in Milan on his way back home. During Leonardo's trip back to Florence, he visited Beatrice d'Este's sister, Isabella, who begged Leonardo to paint her. At 24, she was married off to a royal family with a wedding that cost over $3 million alone. She was one of the most ferocious art collectors in the Renaissance, tracking down any painter she found suitable for her massive collection. After having Cecilia Gallerani send over Lady with an Ermine, Isabella knew that she had to have Leonardo paint her for a portrait, forcing him to make her a chalk rendering before he left for Florence. After Da Vinci departed, he promptly forgot about Isabella's request, whether it be ADHD or the fact that she was a rich, stuck-up brat. Despite her love for art, she often would ridicule some of the greatest painters of her time when it came to their attempts to paint her. See, Isabella was a well-fed woman, and instead of accepting her figure, she would complain to all of her painters that they made her look fat in her portraits, including Renaissance master Andrea Mantegna, who would make one of the most famous works of the time, The Lamentation of Christ.
Is that one of the pictures you have?
I don't have that one added up, but we can look through it. I only added it just to say this guy was a top-notch portrait artist, one of the best, and he rendered her exactly how she looks. And she was like, you kind of make me look fat. This reminds me of a time when I was in figure art class. When Shalane and I first got together, we took art classes together. And I did a figure art class with this woman who was fairly Zoftic, right? And she kind of had like a big bulbous nose and like sort of jowls, right? And they were pronounced. And I remember we go along and the teacher comes along and looks at everybody's portrait and they're like, oh, you need to add some more gravity here. She's leaned a little bit too far forward. Teacher goes by mine. She says, wow, that looks really good. And then the lady comes down and she always had something to say to somebody. The lady comes down, she looks at mine. She's like, I look like a baboon. You made me look like a baboon. And Shalane and I looked at each other and were like, girl, you look like a baboon.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry, but that's just what it is. So sort of a similar situation with Isabella d'Este. In order to track down Leonardo, she would send her own confessor, Pietro, to go on missions to spy on Leonardo, along with knocking at his door and straight up begging him to work on it. In one letter to Isabella, her confessor writes, quote, Leonardo's life is very irregular and uncertain, and he seems to live only for the day. His apprentice, Salai, and some of his other friends took me to see him on Wednesday. In truth, his mathematical experiments have absorbed his thoughts so entirely that he cannot bear the sight of a paintbrush.
Oh.
At this point, Isabella is likely to throw a tantrum, which she was known for, so Friar Pietro begins to tell white lies to please her, writing, quote, if he can get free from his engagement with the King of France without displeasing him, he would rather serve your excellency than any other person in the world. After Leonardo finishes a painting for Robertet, a friend of the king, he will do your portrait immediately.
Jeez, this lady's a piece of work.
Yeah. She's like, I want that painting. This was obviously not true, and the friar would soon go on the pile of other clergy who failed to get a painting out of Da Vinci. But Isabella wasn't done yet. In 1504, she herself would visit Florence and try to find him, coming to his workshop to see it empty. Conveniently...
Bye!
Yeah. Conveniently, Da Vinci was out of town to study the flight of birds, but unfortunately, she did come across Leonardo's stepbrother from his dad's side, Alessandro Amadori, who promised he would do everything in his power to force Leonardo to finish his painting. And after the fervent attempts of 3 different people, Da Vinci would still not do it.
Was it just out of principle, or did he really just hate painting now?
He still painted at the time. That's the weird thing is we'll talk about.
So it feels like it was principle.
It was principle. He probably saw painting more as like I can do this. This is my job. Very interested in like mathematical stuff. So there is some truth to it, but I just don't think he liked Isabella. And a lot of people didn't like Isabella just because she was kind of a brat.
And he probably also had an inclination that no matter what he did and how well he painted her, she'd be like, oh, I look like this or whatever. Yes. And then would be all pissy about it.
Yeah. So I think any of you who are like, hairstylists or anything like that, like I'm sure my wife has dealt with that exact same customer. They're like, I want it this exact color. And Shalana's like, okay, let's do it. And then it's that color. And they're like, it looks terrible. I asked for blonde and this is gold. And it's like, girl.
If I was to be a little bit kind about it, it seems like she's the type of person, like many of us in today's day and age, who we're fine with our mirror image, but if you take a picture of us, holy crap.
That's
looking
true.
Gross, That's
true.
So,
but like there's a difference between a mirror picture and a Renaissance artist painting you. You just might have to. And what's funny is if you look at the pictures of her, she's not ugly in any way. She just does not like the way that she looks.
Huh.
So
it's just very insecure.
Yeah. So as for Da Vinci himself, he was busy opening up a Verrocchio-like workshop that would have dozens of artists collaborating on multiple paintings at a time. We can see this process take place most especially in a painting that isn't as well known to the public, but would be reproduced hundreds of times by other painters in his time, including his fellow Ninja Turtle Raphael in Madonna of the Yarnwinder. So this is kind of a similar theme as some of the other ones we've done. It's a religious painting, but we'll get into it a little bit.
So I think we're at... Have we named all 4 Ninja Turtles by now? Because we named, I want to say you said Donatello in the first episode. And then we've obviously got Leonardo. Mm-hmm. And then you just said Raphael and then Michelangelo.
And Michelangelo.
We got them, everybody.
We got every single one.
We got the turtles.
And we'll have more encounters with Michelangelo in the next episode. And he's a little shit.
Okay.
I am a fervent Michelangelo hater after learning about Da Vinci.
Wow, okay.
So anyway, to talk about Madonna the Yarnwinder, it kind of depicts a scene where Mary is holding baby Jesus, overlooking a Leonardo-style landscape, something that we'd probably see in the Mona Lisa later, complete with flowing rivers thousands of feet below and a fantastical snowy mountain range on the horizon. Jesus, squinting inquisitively, holds a Yarnwinder in his hand, which looks a bit like a cross when you hold it vertically. Besides the obvious Jesus is going to die reference of the cross, what I love from this painting is the interplay between the two characters. Jesus has an expression that is not only mature like we would expect from the Messiah, but it's also still infant-like, with his hands clumsily grasping the Yarnwinder and his face just a few inches away, since infants have poor vision when they're newborn. Leonardo would know this from his dissections. Mary, however, looks lovingly at her son, but her hand is turned palm forward, almost like she is anxiously wanting to take the Yarnwinder from Jesus and save him from his fate when he gets older. Leonardo's Bottega would produce over 40 of these depictions while in Florence, with most of them being sketched out by Da Vinci and then copied over by his apprentices. As I was learning this, I could feel myself deciding that this painting was a little less valuable and almost decided not to discuss it. One of the great Leonardo historians, which we talked about before, Martin Kemp, actually writes about this phenomenon where Da Vinci fans will only care about his, quote, signature works, or his paintings made specifically by him. Kemp thinks there's a huge flaw in this reasoning, writing, quote, "The process of production is more in keeping with a superbly made chair by a designer craftsman. We don't ask if a certain glued joint was made by the head of the workshop or one of his assistants, providing the joint holds and looks good." It had me thinking about my own work and the work I do with Otto making high-end forged gates and railings. I don't see any loss in value from our work being made together, and if I found out that in 500 years Otto's work would be worth less because he employed other skilled professionals, I'd consider it unfair. So while it goes against my instinct with Da Vinci, I try to look at his Bottega work with the same perspective.
I can see that.
Yeah, because it's like, at the end of the day, this is still Da Vinci's work, and all of his contemporaries are still working on it, and it's only going out the door if it's approved by Da Vinci. So what makes it intrinsically less valuable?
And there's probably also every chance that the work that his sort of that the people under his employ were doing, he probably made alterations on the things that he didn't like anyways, where if he saw something, he would go, no, you see what's going on over here with the robe and how it drapes, and what you really want is, and then he'd come in with his brush and fix it up and make a change to it and say, this is how I would want it to go down. So that's what I'm going to do. They're really just following his direction in a lot of ways, and he's adding on top of it and saying this is how it needs to go. So, I mean, I get both sides of the argument, if I can be honest with you, because if I went to a museum and found out that they're like, yes, this is a Da Vinci museum, and I went and looked at all of them, and they were like, oh, also at the end, here's a pamphlet. We didn't want to tell you this up front, but all of these were not actually painted by Da Vinci. They were like at his guidance. I'd be like, wait, hang on a sec.
It's true.
You know what I'm saying? So I get both sides of it.
It's true. But then if we think about more physical art forms, for instance, blacksmithing or glassblowing, like if you've ever seen a Chihuly exhibit, the dude's blind. Most of...
Is he?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
He eventually developed blindness as he got older. Most of his sculpture are made by interns at this point.
Oh.
But like, I don't see it as not Chihuly because I'm like, oh, well, he can't do it because he's blind. It's like Da Vinci can't make these paintings because he can't make 40 at a time. But he can...
It's fair.
In a shop setting, if there were certain scrolls that weren't to Otto's liking, Otto would just not send them out.
True.
But if Otto says this is done exactly the way that I would have done it, then what's the difference between him putting his hands on it and somebody else doing it the exact way that he would have?
I hear you. For sure.
You know? So it would seem just for a moment that Leonardo da Vinci would continue his life walking in his master's footsteps, quietly spending his later years as the head of one of the most reputable bottegas in Italy. However, as we read from Isabella's Friar, Da Vinci could hardly stand painting anymore, and just because he was a bit older, that didn't mean his mind was done exploring. His time in Milan had changed him forever, and he was able to experience unlimited exploration and research, and still hoped for a future where he could live a life of discovery. Leonardo was anything but predictable, and would use a terrible situation to pursue dreams he had abandoned almost 2 decades ago. As I mentioned before, Florence wasn't exactly the city of gold it had once been, and since the decline of the Medici family, political rivals saw the city as an opportunity ripe for the taking. The most infamous rival was a man whose family name would become shorthand for cruelty, and his story would be used as an example of ruthlessness and cunning in Machiavelli's The Prince. We are, of course, talking about Cesare Borgia.
Oh, the Borgia! There's a whole series on them that I've never watched.
Yeah, so Daniel and I talked about this before, but Cesare was named after the Roman general and guy who got stabbed, Julius Caesar. The British would say his name the same way that Americans do, Caesar. Some Italians would call him Cesar, and Russians would adapt it to fit the word Tsar. Germans would call him Kaiser, and Julius would have referred to himself as Caesar. As for the Italians, Julius's name would be adopted to Cesare. So that's what I'll use when referring to Borgia. But just know he's named after Caesar.
Gotcha.
Right?
I figured you would have gone the opposite direction. I figured you would have gone, it's Cesare, but for everybody's brain, let's just say Caesar.
I was going to, but then it was hard to say Cesare Borgia, but it's easier for me to say Cesare Borgia.
That's true. That makes sense.
I don't know why. Because I'm already ready to like go in Italian mode. So then I'm like turning it on and off. It's just not right.
And then I also, if I was to like contextualize it or maybe compartmentalize it better, it would be like the Romans feel like they're the Caesars. And then in Florence, you've got the Cesares.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? I don't know why, but that actually does make sense
but then
to my
we
brain.
have the Kaisers in Germany, which are very close to the Kaisar, which would be how
Caesar would
have called it.
Right.
It's and also Tsar. I don't know why it never occurred to me until I looked into the Cesare's name that Tsar was also Caesar. Like everybody's just like, I'm Caesar. It's kind of funny. Now, while it's true that the Medici were no saints, and Ludovico was a cheating politician who may have even poisoned his own nephew, the reputation of Cesare Borgia is so vile that it makes the rest of them kind of look like Boy Scouts.
Really?
Sorry to the non-Game of Thrones nerds, but if the Medici were Lannisters and the Sforzas were House Baratheon, Cesare Borgia would be best akin to the torturer Ramsay Bolton.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just as a little warning, while the biographers takes pride in writing stories about good people worth knowing, it doesn't mean that they always brush up against the most savory characters themselves. So I'll keep the true crime details to a minimum, but just as a fair warning, this guy isn't awesome.
Okay.
Born in 1475, Cesare was the son of Pope Alexander VI, who was considered to be one of the least holy popes in Catholic history.
He was the son of a pope.
Yes, he was.
Jeez, okay.
His father, according to his contemporaries, had, quote, the fullest measure of all the vices of flesh and spirit, having 10 illegitimate children during his reign, most from separate mothers, and all of which he openly legitimized so he could give them offices in the church.
The Pope had 10 illegitimate children?
Oh, yeah, and then Nepo babied all of them into the Catholic Church.
He truly did Ramsay Bolton them.
Yes.
So he was like, yes, you're supposed to be Ramsay Snow, but I'm going to make you a Bolton.
Literally.
That's crazy.
At 15, Pope Alexander would make his son a bishop and a cardinal when he turned 18, despite the fact that Cesare didn't have a pious bone in his body. During this entire time, he would never bother to take on holy orders, but instead work to gain military power. Cesare would be the first person to resign from being a cardinal and instead have his brother stabbed to death and thrown into a river so he could take over the papal forces.
Oh my gosh.
18 now. He's just like, I don't want to be a pious guy. I think I'd rather murder my brother.
Jeez.
What's so funny is like, we talked about this before, but you're already born into everything. You have everything. But like, I guess that's just not enough.
Everything. You don't have the power.
He was already a cardinal. That's like as powerful as it gets besides being his dad. But,
well, there you go. You just said it. Besides that.
True.
There's always a step or two to climb.
Now, in his 20s, Cesare was fully demented and egomaniacal, with incest, torture, betrayal, and murder being his everyday behavior. As an anecdote, In one area he was conquering, Borgia ordered his deputy, Ramiro de Lorca, to burn, steal from, and torment the city of Cesena to the brink of disaster.
I assume by torment, there are some implications in there?
Yes.
Okay. Everyone, you can probably fill in the blanks on what that means.
If you think of an implication, you're probably right.
Yeah.
Despite the cruel orders, Ramiro complied, leaving the citizens absolutely terrified. After weeks of pillaging had been done, Borgia would have a present for the citizens of Cesena. On Christmas Day, Borgia would tie up his own deputy and cut him in half, declaring, quote, Cesare Borgia decided that there was no more need for this excessive power.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So by making his underling do his bidding, Borgia had made himself both the torturer and the savior of Cesena.
Jeez, that is twisted.
Mm-hmm. Tricks like this were normal for his conquest, like totally normal. So cities were generally pretty smart to keep him at an arm's length. And in 1501, Cesare had set his sights on Florence. Despite Florence being at its weakest point, the Republic decided that they would be able to stave off war by paying him protection money, giving him 36,000 florins to stop him from laying siege, along with allowing him full rights to move his forces in the area. So I want to say it's close to $1 million US. Just being like, don't touch us. We'll even let you live here. Just don't kill us. And that was like, this was successful, but only for a year. In 1502, Borgia would ask for Florence to send a delegation to stay in his court and discuss terms. Florence sent 2 men, a priest named Francesco Soldarini, who supported the burning of vanities night, and the son of a once great lawyer who, despite being penniless, had gained a reputation for expert observation and cutting, a boy named Niccolo Machiavelli. The 2 entered his court in complete darkness, with only one candle lit, illuminating Cesare's face, now pocked with syphilis.
Ugh.
Borgia would never promise not to attack, but instead told these 2 to convey a message, to show him respect, and to listen to his requests. One of these requests was to have Florence bring him the master painter and engineer, Leonardo da Vinci.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even know that Leo crossed paths with these people.
Yeah. So the way that I kind of see this is sort of like a Euron Greyjoy thing, where like you're in his domain. So my first thought was, why Da Vinci? Well, it turns out that Leonardo had a run-in with Borgia in Milan since Cesare lended his aid to the King of France in destroying the Sforza's army. After visiting the Last Supper and meeting him, Da Vinci likely showed Borgia his engineering schematics, none the wiser of his reputation. While Da Vinci would regret his time in his service, he certainly wanted to work for him because it would allow him to take on a role he had wanted for years, to be a war engineer. As for the question, why Cesare, it's a bit harder to say. While it's clear that Cesare would give him his dream job, there's also a chance that Leonardo was sent by Florence to act as a spy for them, given that many of his notes contained secret codes, which might have been letters intended for his hometown. So the people who say Da Vinci's notes are secret and they're like coded, you're wrong except for this. He did write code. It was probably very helpful that he wrote backwards, to be honest, because he wrote backwards, but then he would also use abbreviations for certain cities. And we think that those were letters sent back to the Republic of Florence to try to let them know, like, hey, this is where my boss is going.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay. So basically, it feels like that initial theory got out and ran rampant, and everybody went, oh, he just wrote in code all the time. But it was just like, no, it was just this one point that he started writing code because he was trying to, like, basically help his hometown.
Yeah. And honestly, he probably didn't need to do much spying considering Machiavelli was with him. During his first few years after being sent for by Borgia, he never actually met up with him, but instead worked to survey the forts and castles he had already taken over. Having done this for Ludovico, Da Vinci set out right away to inspect the warlord's defenses with a written passport by Cesare, paraphrasing, quote, "The engineer general, Leonardo da Vinci, shall be given free passage and is relieved of all public tax for himself and his party. Provide him with as many men as he requisitions and grant him all the help and favor he demands. Let no man dare to do the contrary if he does not wish to incur our extreme displeasure."
Oh my gosh. That's like,
which, I mean, like, I don't feel like I need a notice by this guy to, like, not piss him off, to be honest. I think I would just do anything that he said.
It's implied.
Leonardo was honestly thrilled with his new position. Since his 20s, he had hoped to be referred to as a war engineer, and now he has a paper by the son of the Pope saying he's a general.
Jeez.
Sure, his boss was a little intimidating, but Leonardo was no stranger to men of power, and that meant that he would be even more useful. After wrapping up his surveys, Da Vinci would accompany Borgia to Fossombrone, where he would go to see his master's cunning in play.
And I feel like you brushed past this really quickly, but Leonardo was given the appointment of general.
Engineer general, yes.
Engineer, okay.
Yeah.
Is there a difference?
I don't think he can command troops, but he can command any person who is building structures for defense.
Ah, okay.
We're also thinking about Roman times. The Romans really won a lot of wars by their engineering skills, not by their military prowess. And Cesare probably very much knew that. So he was like, we need to have a general that is just in charge of infrastructure, right?
Crazy.
Making sure that castles are impregnable, that type of thing.
Crazy. Wow. I didn't realize that. Again, I mean, there's lots I didn't know about Da Vinci, but I feel like it was a huge whoosh over my head of, I didn't even know he was involved really at any point with like an army.
Yeah.
I knew he had like sketched out war machines and stuff, but I always felt like that was just sort of his imagination of when he saw a war and he was like, man, it'd be much better if you did a horse chariot with a scythe on the front of it. That'd be sweet. But like, yeah, seeing this is pretty awesome.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not even just a war. This is the son of the Pope.
Right.
And you are his engineer general, primary engineer general. You're the guy who gets stuff done.
Which now, at this point in time, we're past the Roman Empire. So would we say that really the Catholic Church and therefore the Pope would have been arguably the most powerful person in Italy?
Yes.
Okay.
Bar none.
Okay.
Literally nobody more powerful. The Medicis were pretty powerful, but they were holding on to their own little...
And they were
kingdom.
still going to church. So like,
yeah,
there was an automatic kind of umbrella that was like, well, we're under the Pope. So
that's the crazy thing about religious power is like, yeah, you can kick out the military forces of a religion, but can you kick out the ideology?
Yeah.
Not
That's
really.
wild.
If we as the United States, I mean, we've had all sorts of stuff with, religion and stuff like that, but like the concept of picturing citizens pick their government over their religion, that would never happen.
Yeah.
So, like I said, they're in Fossombrone right now. And just as an anecdote, we'll talk about one of Borgia's infiltrations, right?
Cool.
Before him laid an impenetrable defense. So instead of laying siege to the town, Cesare simply bribed a guard to let them through a secret entrance. After seeing this, Leonardo writes, quote, "Be sure that the escape tunnel does not lead to the inner fortress, lest the fortress be captured by treachery or betrayal of his own lord." So think like the tunnels under Casterly Rock.
I was just literally thinking that. I was like, when Tyrion talks about how he designed the sewers and he lets all of the Unsullied into the secret passage through the sewers.
And that's Borgia was just like, oh, we'll never actually be able to break this castle down. So why don't I just bribe somebody to let me in through the sewer system, and then we can just walk right up into the inner fortress, because that's where the escape tunnels are. Obviously, your duke or whoever is living there wants to be the first person to leave. So he's like, build the tunnel right up to my office. But that's like the worst thing possible, because then that means someone can come in through the other end as long as you bribe enough guards.
That's crazy. It's like the phrase that Braun says, just like, give me a few good men and some rope and I'll impregnate the bitch.
Yeah.
Sorry for the language.
So after the attack commenced, Da Vinci would also note that curved walls were better at deflecting cannon fire than flat ones, which he would use in multiple different fortresses that he did for Borgia. Outside of the battlefield, Da Vinci would also be made useful aiding his lord in conquest. As an anecdote, mathematician Luca Pacioli would write about a time where Da Vinci's knowledge of physics aided the warpath. Quote, "One day, Cesare Borgia found himself in his army at a river 24 paces wide and could find no bridge, nor any material to make one except a stack of wood only 16 paces long. From this wood, using neither iron, nor rope, nor any other construction, his noble engineer made a bridge strong enough for the army to pass over." And we have an image of this.
I know exactly what bridge you're talking about. This was in one of the earlier episodes. I mentioned the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. In that episode, I was like, it's the Denver Museum, or I said the Denver Nature of Science and Museum or something like that. Weird.
Yeah.
But the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, they had this actual bridge built and on display and showing how it all kind of linked together. It's really, really cool. And it's also a total just brain effort. When you look at it, you're just like, how does this...
To kind of picture it for those of you who aren't going to hop on the website, there is sticks going across the length of the river that have other sticks going through them so that they can't pull themselves down or pull themselves up. It kind of locks itself in place like a Chinese finger trap. If you ever got one of those at an arcade,
I could see that.
It's a very similar situation where there's no joints or glue or really any mechanical fastening. It's all just allowing pressure to do its own thing and locking everything into place. And it was sturdy enough that all of Cesare's forces walked across this bridge, including the people who were building siege engines and all of that.
It's science.
Mm-hmm.
She blinded me with science.
What's that from?
You never heard that song?
No.
Blinded me with science.
This is the part where I let you sing for another 3 minutes like last episode.
I can't believe you've never heard the Blinded Me with Science song.
No.
It's from I want to say the 80s. I'll play it for you afterwards.
Yeah,
it's silly, but fun.
I wasn't alive then.
Well, but I know, but it's like we've had this conversation
I know,
and how I was listening to Panic at the Disco in high school and you're like, oh yeah, one of the first bands we went and saw live was Panic at the Disco.
It's
and I'm
true.
like,
it's true.
That's before your time.
Well, okay, to be fair, he had a 30-year career.
True.
So now, one of Leonardo's greatest contributions to the art of war wouldn't be a tank or a scythe-wielding chariot, but instead, it would be a map. During Leonardo's time in Imola, a city northeast of Florence, Da Vinci would perfect his design for the odometer, which we talked about in the last episode. This allowed him to accurately measure the perimeter of a city, along with each individual building inside. Just like with anatomy and engineer drafting, Da Vinci would pioneer how we display visual information by creating one of the first bird's eye view maps in history.
Really?
Yeah. Drawn almost as accurately as if it was taken by a satellite.
It's the circular one I'm seeing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It kind of looks like a Call of Duty map.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Using nothing but his invention and a magnetic compass, Leonardo was able to draw a perfect aerial view of Imola.
That is awesome.
Yeah. So once again, it's just one of these things where it's like, the map itself isn't what is noteworthy. But the concept of the map is what's noteworthy. Same thing with exploded design with engineering or his dissection drawings that he did when he was in medical studies. The way that he displayed the information was so important. And this would be used after him for forever. For anyone who plays war games or for those of you who have military experience, you'll know how incredibly important it is to have an up-to-date, accurate map of the area that you're in.
And it really does. I think it was, really nail on the head kind of a thing where it reminds me of a mini map on your screen when you're playing video games, where you can see it's like the little circle in the corner of your screen, and it shows where you are and the little arrow that's moving around. Except there's no arrow. That'd be pretty sweet.
Yeah. if you went to a printing press or something like that, and you were to have a depiction of a city, it would generally be somebody climbed to a hill and then drew it out and tried to draw it out from multiple angles because they're like, I'm not going to map this all out. There's no way for me to do the math on this. So let me just find a tall place. And then that shows you the city as best I can.
That seems crazy to me.
But Da Vinci was like, oh, so this building is 20 feet from this building and it's so-and-so in perimeter and it's facing this direction. And he just wrote it all down. You can even see on that map, there are folds on the map because he would walk around the defenses and pull it out of his pocket, unfold it and check it.
Wow.
So it's
really
creased
cool
from this observation.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So, this would allow better troop placement, finer understanding of geographic resources, and it would give generals an insight onto the weaknesses of their own defensive points. While it isn't as exciting as an 80-foot-long crossbow, it's really easy to overlook how important maps are to human advancement.
Totally.
Leonardo would spend his winter cooped up with the Borgia's forces in Imola. During this time, he would finally become acquainted with Niccolo Machiavelli in person, who was still following Borgia around at Florence's request. Now, while the things that made Machiavelli famous won't be a huge part in Da Vinci's story, he would play a colossal role in world politics and history, so I feel like it'd be kind of wrong not to kind of give him a little biography of himself.
I don't know much, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
I know the name and I feel like it's not a good name, but I don't know that.
Yeah, that's kind of fair. Leonardo's story is kind of like you're trying to track a dragonfly going through fireworks, where you're like, I'm trying so hard to focus on this very important, very sort of beautiful life, but there are so many explosions and so much turbulent force around him that it's like, I have to add some context.
Totally.
Right?
I appreciate that.
So Niccolo was born in Florence in 1469, making him 17 years younger than Da Vinci, having met Leonardo around 32. He was the son of a notary like Da Vinci's dad, who, like Piero and Antonio, also spent most of his life dealing with the debt of his father that was put on him. If you remember, Piero's dad, Grandpa Antonio, was really fun guy to Da Vinci, but blew all of the finances. Same story with Machiavelli's dad. He was just like, man, I've got to get myself out of the debt that my dad got me through.
Cool, but not responsible.
Yeah, exactly. Niccolo was penniless when he was kind of coming of age because of that.
Gotcha.
Niccolo would work in and out of the political spheres for Florence, using his astute observation and manipulation to rise into high society despite being poor. Think Littlefinger from Game of Thrones.
Okay.
In his later years, after fame, imprisonment, torture, and retirement, he would write his magnum opus, Il Principe, or The Prince. As a result of this book, Machiavelli would be considered the grandfather of political science, writing about the inner workings of politics from a perspective never written before. Instead of writing about ideal political structures like Socrates, Niccolo believed that the most effective rulers were the ones who were able to bend the rules of ethics to their favor. Having spent time with Borgia and the rest of the church, he would see that, well, one should try to make his subjects religious. Most strong leaders were far from holy men, and their ruthlessness was how they were effective. Machiavelli would say that the ethics of politicians behind closed doors were vastly different than what they showed to their people, and he believed that a good ruler should be feared more than loved by their subjects. Along with an iron fist, Niccolo saw that the most deceitful and cunning rulers tended to survive the longest. His ideas of how a society should run are controversial at best, and the debate is still out as to whether his work is worth reading. Some political scientists see Machiavelli as someone who is exposing the realpolitik, being realistic about how things get done, while others see the prince as a sort of set of instructions for future tyrants to sour politics even further.
Yeah, that's sort of what it's sounding like to me. It seems like Machiavelli was this sort of like, no, if you're beating your people into submission, this is the way to go.
Yeah, he's like, a good politician should be very nice to the outside, but should hold no favors if they're not advantageous, should not bring honor into things if it's going to get him killed. He kind of describes, in one quote, he says, a leader should be both a lion and a fox.
Interesting.
A lion is honorable, very strong, but not very cunning. Whereas the fox doesn't really have the power, but is able to sort of dodge traps a little bit easier. And that's kind of how he sees politics.
Gotcha.
Right. Personally, I wouldn't follow Machiavelli, but I think he does a very good job of exposing what was already happening. He's not giving people instructions that they aren't following already.
Gotcha.
Right. He's not saying you should be cunning. And then all these popes who were not cunning were like, you're right. They were already doing that shit. They were already being deceitful. They were already torturing people. He was just kind of pointing it out.
So more of a reporter than a philosopher in a weird way.
The problem is we can't really tell whether or not Machiavelli thought that it was fine to do that. Some
Okay.
people say that he was like, Niccolo was totally okay with deceit in politics. He thinks that that's the way that things should run. Some other people say that's more of he's just saying this is how things are run.
Gotcha.
Right. But in 1502, Machiavelli was not the writer of a possibly evil handbook. He was a 20-something, living inside a cold castle leaning over Leonardo's sketchbook through the candlelight. Unfortunately, Da Vinci would see firsthand the ruthlessness that Niccolo would write about as they approached the city of Senigallia. Senigallia had been a thorn in the side of Borgia and had rebelled from his rule on multiple occasions while he was occupied with other parts of his papal conquest. So, after the winter weather left, he would bring his army to their gates in 1503. When he arrived, Borgia ordered the leaders to visit him to negotiate terms, promising that they could keep their title so long as they pledged their loyalty. They agreed, but as soon as they entered his encampment, Borgia tied down the men and strangled them to death, ordering his soldiers to pillage the town so thoroughly that even Machiavelli wrote that it went too far. Among the men who Borgia had choked to death was Vitellozzo Vitelli, one of Leonardo's friends from court, who even lent him a book by Archimedes.
Aw.
Yeah.
Buddy.
Leonardo's boss had killed one of the friends that he had spent time studying with.
Jeez.
While Da Vinci would never write anything about this event, he would leave his service just a few days after Machiavelli was called back into Florence as well. The one bit of insight we get from Da Vinci's short time with Borgia is a note that he made after withdrawing the money he made from him into his bank account, writing, quote, "Save me from strife and battle, a most beastly madness." Yeah, so basically he's like, he kind of internalizes it, but when he finally gets back to Florence, he just is like, you know what? I am done with this guy. I'm pulling out all of the cash that I made with him so that I can keep it, because who knows what this guy's going to do next. And he's like, you know what? War is not it for me anymore.
Yeah,
Right?
it's interesting that it kind of started with Da Vinci saying, I've always wanted to be a war engineer. It reminds me of kids going in to fight for the USA in World War II and going like, oh, sign me up. All I want to do is fight for the cause. And getting back and going, that's the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
And if we can avoid this destruction, we should.
Yeah.
Right? Once they saw the grim reality of the situation, they kind of changed their tune on it. That's the impression I'm
And like
getting.
a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, why would he work for Borgia? First of all, hindsight's 2020. This guy is the son of the Pope. So like there's some expectation that he's going to have some level of decorum, right? And Da Vinci had already worked for powerful people before. The Medicis were not, like we said, the Medicis weren't Boy Scouts. Ludovico wasn't, a saint. But like, I think once Da Vinci got to the front of the battlegrounds and realized that this was not honorable, and even if it was, it still wouldn't be for him. I think that's kind of when he had that realization finally. And he's already in his 50s at this point.
Right.
So it's not like this isn't a bright-eyed kid. This is somebody who's had experience with people in power. This is just, he's never been this up close to it, I think.
Yeah.
Now, back in Florence and free of Borgia, Leonardo would wage war for Florence. But instead of spears and cannons, Da Vinci would try to defeat his enemies without a single life being taken. At the same time that Leonardo would head home from Borgia's castle, Florence finally caught news about a business venture that would make them filthy rich again. An Italian whack job hired by the Spanish had claimed that he was able to sail west and reach the shores of India.
What whack job could possibly think that, Akiva?
Christopher Columbus. Leonardo's friend Machiavelli had a direct line to someone on the scene, having worked with the cousin of another explorer named Amerigo Vespucci. Amerigo, America. That's our guy. Okay. Amerigo doubted that the Earth was small enough to reach India from, and was proven right when he set sail and landed on the shores of a new land, Brazil. The news was earth-shattering. There was a new world across the Atlantic Ocean, and Europe saw it ripe for the plundering. While this was all well and good, unlike many major cities in Italy, Florence was completely landlocked. They used to control the Mediterranean city of Pisa, but after the whole Borgia mess, they were too weak to keep control of their most important port city. Florence only had one river that they could trade on, the Arno, but that was now under the control of Pisa. With no real army and very little resources, the cunning Machiavelli and inventive Leonardo da Vinci would team up to do the most logical thing: steal the Arno River.
Oh. Also, really quickly before we move past it, you said there was the explorer that discovered Brazil was named Amerigo?
Amerigo Vespucci. That is where the term America comes from.
Fun fact that I did not know.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's so funny because we'd be like, who discovered America? Columbus. Why is America called America? I don't know.
I didn't know.
I didn't really
I will
either.
fully admit. Yeah, that's crazy.
But yeah, Machiavelli worked with Amerigo Vespucci's cousin. So he was like kind of one of the first to know. Like I said, sort of a Littlefinger character. He kind of had his connects, and he was like, listen, they found a landmass on the other side of the planet, and we need to find a way to get ships to go that way. We're landlocked, so we got to figure this out. And Da Vinci was like, well, we have the Arno River. Why don't we just steal it? Why don't we just steal the entire river?
Wow.
The plan, at least to Da Vinci, was simple. The Arno River, which flows from Florence to Pisa, would be dammed up, and Da Vinci would have a team build a new trench, leading it through a different waterway to make sure that it didn't stop at their rival city along the way. This would be a way that Leonardo could win a war for his hometown peacefully with the work of construction guys instead of soldiers. Wow. The only problem, however, was the amount of dirt that had to be moved. This is sort of like, they're like, in 1500, they're like, let's make the Panama Canal. you know,
Wow,
that type
okay.
of thing.
Jeez.
The channel was planned to be 32 feet deep and have to go through grasslands and even a mountain, which Da Vinci made plans to construct a tunnel for. After calculating the average volume of a shovel of dirt and the average amount of dirt a man can dig in an hour, Da Vinci guessed that his crew would need to move at least, 1 million tons of dirt.
Oh my gosh.
And the job would take 1.3 million man hours.
Oh my gosh.
Or 100 days for a crew of 500 guys working from sunrise to sunset. I did the numbers and I was like, 100 days, 500 guys, that doesn't make sense. And I was like, 8 times 100 times 500. And I was like, oh, he's expecting these guys to work 16 to 18
hours, basically.
Which I was like, I guess that makes sense. There wasn't a union in Florence, really. Machiavelli and Da Vinci would go into constructing a way for building their canal, having an incredible machine for lifting out 24 full carts of dirt using a mobile excavator. You know, when you're building a trench, it's kind of hard to get a wheelbarrow going up the hill as you filled the dirt.
Yeah.
So basically, it was like 24 cranes attached to one another with a mine cart at the bottom that, you know, the construction guys would fill the dirt, and then a couple guys who run the cranes would ride sort of bicycle pedals that would lift up the dirt and then be swung out of the trench. That way no one had to push the dirt, you know, manually, and everybody could just continually dig without stopping.
So I was waiting to jokingly say, and then Da Vinci created the world's first crane. And it's sounding like cranes were already a thing for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, if you remember when in our first episode, when we were talking about theater.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I just didn't expect to think of like cranes doing something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's how they got the ball on the top of the Santa Maria cathedral that Da Vinci made. That's how they got it on the top.
See, I in my mind, I imagined it like a complicated series of scaffolding and then a bunch of pulleys to get it all up to the top. But this is just my imagination.
I mean, a crane is just a powered pulley system, if you think about it.
I'm thinking of modern day cranes, like that are up with they're like L-shaped.
It looks very much like
L's.
that, actually. It looks a lot like that.
Cool.
Not just straight L-shaped because it's made out of wood, so it needs some more support.
Sure.
But similar. If you look at the website, you'll see it.
Okay.
Florence had the manpower, technology, and determination, but once again, small-minded people got in the way of Leonardo's practical but complicated plans. In 1504, when the digging commenced, the city hired a new waterworks engineer who would scrap Leonardo's crane design, and instead of making a massive canal, he would dig 2 ditches that were half the depth. After all of Leonardo's effort, Machiavelli would fight for their plan to stay intact, writing, quote, "The bed of the ditch is shallower than the bed of the Arno. This would have a negative effect and would not direct the project to the end we wish." While they were correct, the new engineer didn't listen. And when it came time, their master plan was a flop. Machiavelli's assistant, sent to report back, would write, quote, "The waters never went through the ditches except when the river was flooded, and as soon as it subsided, the water flowed back. After a rainstorm, the ditches collapsed and flooded nearby farms, putting a final nail in the coffin." So it's just another one of these irritating moments where the engineering was so spot on, everything would have worked. And like, honestly, 500 guys for 100 days to reroute a river, the math worked out.
Yeah.
Everything worked out. They just were like, no, there's no way. We'll make it half the size, and I'm just not gonna, think. Because like they could have, imagine how crazy that would have been if just like, oh yeah, in the Renaissance, Da Vinci stole a river.
I was honestly waiting for you to get to this point, and I'm not surprised that this didn't work out because it just seems like budget always gets in the way of the dream sort of thing. But I was waiting for you to go, and if anybody is out in Italy or visiting or whatever, this river that you may enjoy here and here, that was made by Da Vinci. Like, I was waiting for that.
And it's not even a budget thing, too. They had the budget. They had the manpower. In fact, I'm pretty sure they used the same amount of guys for the same amount of time, but instead of building one large canal that had a crane that would load out all of the dirt, the guy decided to build 2 ditches that were not the right size, and the river would still continue to flow through Pisa. Ugh. Eventually Florence would, kind of coop up the soldiers to fight Pisa and get their sort of dock back. But it would have been way cooler if Da Vinci won. No one would have died. Everybody would have been fine. All they would have done was basically been like, haha, got your river. And then,
and away they go.
So that kind of put the final nail in the coffin. And that is where we will pick up for part 6 of Leonardo da Vinci.
We're just getting cooking, I feel like.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Dang, man. Fascinating. And also, as you were talking about the crane system, I looked up, you had sent me the list of all the pictures before we started recording here, and I'm looking at the crane, and you're right. It is not that different from a modern day crane.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like there's almost something about it. For everybody that is curious, you can go to thebiographerspodcast.com. We're going to have a full list of all of the pictures there if you're curious. But it looks almost like it's on, I don't know about a rail system or wheel system, but it looks like it's able to push forward as they're digging out the trench, basically, this new river, right?
That's exactly what it does. It's like the crane is on like a large sort of wheel system, and as soon as they dig, 6 feet or 12 feet, the guys who operate the crane get out of their little bicycle seats and then push the crane forward, and then they continue to dig. It kind of reminds me of modern contraptions used for mining, where
I could see that
the drilling mechanism is on a cart that can move forward.
Yeah, super cool. Or like when they were making the channel. Do you know about that?
The channel? What's that?
The English Channel Tunnel between France and the UK. If you've ever seen Ocean's 11, there's a point where they have a drilling machine that they're using. Or maybe it's Ocean's 13. I think that's what it is. Ocean's 13, not 11. They're drilling under Vegas because they want to simulate an earthquake, and they use one of the channel machines. And it's this sort of like cheese grater drill that pushes through, and it just moves along as it's moving the dirt. It's really, really cool.
That's cool.
Anyways,
that's cool.
Very, very interesting, man. This might take the cake for my new favorite episode so far.
I'm really glad to hear that. What I really liked about this is, and we'll get into some art stuff for the next episode because we're going to meet Michelangelo. So we're going to talk about art, and we might even talk about some more famous paintings too. I'm going to time it out because I guess I'll just say it flat out. Da Vinci is already working on the Mona Lisa now, but he doesn't finish working on it until he dies. So I'm trying to find just the right moment where I'm like, this is when we talk about this.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
But we'll talk about some other paintings like Leda and the Swan, Michelangelo. That's great. What I love about this is it's kind of bringing up a cast of characters, and it's almost, like I said, like kind of like a heist situation where we got like all of these different factions vying for one another. The Medicis, the fall of the Medicis just from like an illness, and then the rise of like a conservative Catholic cult taking over Florence, and then they die down, and then the Borgias come in, and then when the Borgias come in, the young and cunning Machiavelli begins sort of snaking his way through politics.
Totally. The Game of Thrones references are very apt, if you ask me, because that's exactly
really
what this feels like.
And I keep trying to make references other than that, but I also know that's like, this is the best. This is the best reference for the situation.
No, I completely agree. And again, it feels very, very appropriate for the situation at hand.
My basketball reference was not nearly as good in the last episode. I was listening to that. I was like, why did I think that I was the guy who could do that?
Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode. A couple of things we'll kind of go through on the checklist here. First and foremost, again, if anybody is enjoying this show, if you are able to support us on Patreon, any support would be greatly appreciated. That's going to be patreon.com/thebiographers. You can also find us on social media, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and it's usually just going to be at The Biographers, except for Instagram, which is at @the.biographers. We are also on Facebook, but barely. I'll be honest with you. I feel like Facebook is kind of dying, and
It's just AI stuff at this point. That's it.
Hey, look, everybody tell us if you think that we need to be, way bigger on Facebook. I'm not opposed to it, but I just feel like it's also a lot more difficult to navigate through. When I try to post on it, when I try to do stuff on it, I'm like, I don't even know where to start anymore. All these other platforms are just easier, and Facebook feels way more complicated. But anyway, that's here nor there. Next thing is anybody who is interested in chef's knives or any type of custom knife making, obviously go check out Akiva's website. That's going to be Metalwork by Meola, MEOLA.com. You can use the code biographers at checkout. You get 10% off of your order there. Or if you wanted anything, I'd assume custom, you can also reach out to us and we'll kind of go from there. That's Akiva's domain. You can speak to that more than me.
Also, just as another plug, something that I've been doing almost more than knife making is I'm actually working as a teacher in Denver at Hardy and Fuller. So if you want to learn knife making from me, go check out Hardy and Fuller. I have classes available all the way into the fall, and we're going to book lots more. And hopefully once we get enough students through there, we'll actually have an open studio. So once you learn a couple of basics, you can just come in on a regular basis and learn and make your own knives. So
that's super cool.
Yeah, check out Hardy and Fuller. That's where I'm teaching. I teach almost every other weekend. Yeah.
And if you guys just think that Akiva's a cool dude, that's how Akiva and I became friends.
Yeah.
I literally started to take some blacksmithing and metalworking, and really specifically with the goal of wanting to make chef's knives, or really just like, I want to make my own chef knife or two. And then now here we are. We're buddies. And
he
we're
thought I was smart enough
together.
to write a biography, which I guess he's kind of right. We'll see.
Buddy, you keep selling yourself short.
I know. I'm just playing.
You're being so unkind to yourself.
It's the classic, dumb blacksmith archetype. I have to play into it.
I don't think there's an archetype about dumb blacksmiths, but maybe that's just I'm not into the culture enough or something. Yeah. But anyhow, last thing on the little agenda before we shut things down here, if anybody does have any questions, comments, or corrections, you can shoot us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. We know for a fact that we're not always going to be 100% right about absolutely everything. We try our hardest to do as much research as we possibly can.
I'm right about everything. Fight me about it in the emails.
Come on, bro. Fight me.
Come on. What, you think I'm wrong about something? I'm not. Email us. I dare you.
But yes, if anybody does have anything they want to correct us on, or if they have questions, we also do, generally between our series, we have an episode that we call Office Hours, and we try to answer questions that we've asked along the way, or we correct things that we found were wrong along the way. So if anybody does have questions for us as you've gone through things, or again, corrections, you can shoot us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. Anything else from your side, buddy?
Nah, man. Hope you guys are enjoying.
Yeah, me too. Well, we'll let you... Oh, yeah,
one
what's
last
up?
Thing.
What's up?
Hi, Nana Selma.
Hi, Nana Selma.
Hi, Nana Selma. I just finally got a hold of... I haven't heard from her in forever, but my Nana Selma called me, and she's like, honey, how you doing? And I was like, okay, well, come listen to my biographer's thing. So if she manages to figure out how to listen to us, hi, Nana. Love you.
Hey, Nana. Yay. Hopefully you have listened, and hopefully you enjoyed the show. Well, we'll let everybody go from here, but like I always like to say, remember, ignorance is not stupidity, it is the absence of knowledge, and I do hope you all learned something today.
Bye!
Bye!
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.